Marcus Johnson was not just another truck driver. He was the kind of man who had spent nearly 3 decades on the road, hauling everything from furniture to construction materials across America's highways. His life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and Marcus took pride in that. For him, the open road wasn't just a job, it was his sanctuary. Every sunrise painted the horizon with new colors, and every sunset reminded him of how vast and beautiful the world could be. But today something felt different. The sky above him was unusually dark, heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on the earth like a weight. Yet Marcus didn't think much of it. He'd seen storms before, and he knew how to handle them. It was late afternoon when Marcus pulled into a small gas station along Route 66 in rural Oklahoma. The place was nothing fancy, just a tiny building with a couple of fuel pumps and a snack aisle inside. But it served its purpose well for weary travelers looking to stretch their legs or grab a quick bite. As Marcus stepped out of his massive semi-truck, he noticed a group of people standing near their cars, their faces etched with worry. They were checking their phones, glancing nervously at the sky and talking in hushed tones. Something about their demeanor caught Marcus's attention. It wasn't just the usual stress of travel. There was genuine fear in their eyes. Curiosity got the better of him, so Marcus walked over to see what was going on. One woman, clutching her phone tightly, explained that local news reports were warning of an impending tornado. It was supposed to touch down within the hour, and everyone was trying to figure out what to do next. Some wanted to keep driving, hoping to outrun the storm. Others thought staying put might be safer, but no one seemed sure. The uncertainty hung thick in the air, almost as palpable as the storm clouds overhead. Marcus listened quietly, observing the group. Among them was a middle-aged woman wearing casual clothes, a baseball cap tugged low over her forehead and sunglasses perched on her nose. She looked like any other traveler, though there was something about the way she carried herself that hinted at authority. Her name, he would later learn, was Eleanor Hayes, but Marcus didn't know that yet. To him, she was just another person caught in a bad situation. The wind began picking up, rustling leaves and sending dust spiraling into the air. A few drops of rain splattered against the ground, signaling the storm's approach. Marcus glanced at the horizon, where the dark clouds churned ominously. He had been through enough storms to recognize the signs. This one wasn't going to be mild. It was shaping up to be dangerous, maybe even deadly. "Y'all need to get moving," Marcus said loudly, breaking the tense silence. Everyone turned to look at him. This ain't the kind of weather you want to stick around for. Some of the travelers hesitated, unsure whether they should trust this stranger. After all, Marcus was just a truck driver, a big black man with a deep voice and calloused hands. He wasn't wearing a uniform or flashing any badges. But there was something reassuring about the way he spoke, calm and steady, like someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. "I've got room in my rig," Marcus continued, gesturing toward his semi-truck parked nearby. "It's built tough and I know these roads. If we leave now, we can find somewhere safe before the worst hits." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the group began to gather their things. The decision wasn't easy, leaving their own vehicles behind felt like giving up control, but they trusted Marcus's judgment. First, a young mother with a toddler in tow approached, her face pale with fear. Next came a college student, lugging a backpack filled with textbooks. 2 hitchhikers, brothers by the looks of them, exchanged a glance before nodding and following suit. Even the woman in the baseball cap, the one Marcus didn't recognize, joined the group without argument. As everyone climbed aboard, Marcus made sure everyone was accounted for. 6 strangers, including the woman in the cap, squeezed into his truck cab or held on tight to the sides. The space was cramped, but no one complained. They were too focused on survival to care about comfort. Marcus climbed back into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The engine roared to life and the truck lurched forward, leaving the gas station behind. Outside, the storm grew angrier by the second. The wind howled like a wild animal and sheets of rain pelted the windshield. Visibility dropped dangerously low, forcing Marcus to rely on instinct as much as sight. Trees swayed violently, their branches snapping under the force of the gale. Power lines sagged precariously, threatening to snap at any moment. Yet despite the chaos unfolding around him, Marcus remained calm. His years on the road had taught him how to stay focused under pressure. Inside the cab, the passengers clung to whatever they could find for stability. The young mother hugged her toddler close, whispering soothing words into his ear. The college student stared out the window, wide-eyed, as debris flew past. The hitchhikers muttered prayers under their breath, while the woman in the cab sat silently, her expression unreadable. No one spoke much, but the shared sense of danger created an unspoken bond between them. They were strangers, yes, but they were also survivors united by circumstance. Marcus couldn't help but feel a pang of responsibility. These people had placed their trust in him, and he wasn't about to let them down. He scanned the road ahead, searching for any sign of shelter. Up ahead, he spotted a partially collapsed barn, its roof caved in and walls leaning precariously. It wouldn't hold against the tornado, but it gave him an idea. Just beyond the barn, hidden among the trees, was an old underground storm shelter, marked by a faded wooden sign. It wasn't much, but it was their best chance. With renewed determination, Marcus steered the truck toward the shelter. The ride was bumpy, the tires splashing through puddles and kicking up mud. Lightning illuminated the sky in flashes, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. But Marcus didn't falter. He drove with precision, navigating the treacherous terrain with skill and care. When they finally reached the shelter, he parked the truck nearby and jumped out, motioning for the others to follow. "Hurry!" he shouted over the roar of the wind. "Get inside!" One by one, the passengers scrambled out of the truck and rushed toward the shelter. Marcus stayed behind, making sure no one lingered outside. Once everyone was safely inside the dimly lit bunker, he stood guard at the entrance, his eyes fixed on the swirling vortex in the distance. The tornado was monstrous, its funnel cloud churning with fury. It tore through the countryside, flattening everything in its path. But here, beneath the earth, Marcus and the others were safe. For now. As the storm raged above them, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of relief. He had done everything he could to protect these strangers, and though he didn't realize it yet, one of them would go on to change his life in ways he never imagined. The storm outside was relentless, a monstrous force of nature that seemed almost alive in its fury. Inside the cramped underground shelter, the air was thick with tension and the faint smell of damp earth. The walls of the bunker were rough and uneven, carved directly into the ground decades ago by someone who'd hoped it would never have to be used. A single dim bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly as the tornado's vibrations shook the ground above them. It cast flickering shadows across the faces of the 7 strangers huddled together, each trying to process what was happening. Marcus stood near the entrance, his tall frame filling the narrow doorway. He kept one hand on the heavy wooden hatch, ready to slam it shut if debris started flying toward them. His eyes darted between the swirling chaos outside and the group inside, ensuring everyone was accounted for. Though he appeared calm, his heart was racing. He knew how unpredictable tornadoes could be, how quickly they could shift direction or grow stronger. But Marcus had always been the kind of man who faced danger head-on, and right now his focus was solely on keeping these people safe. Inside the shelter, the passengers were doing their best to stay composed. The young mother, whose name was Sarah, sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, cradling her toddler against her chest. Her son Liam was wide-eyed but quiet, clutching a stuffed bear that had somehow survived the scramble into the truck. Sarah murmured soft words to him, rocking gently back and forth. She looked exhausted, her face pale and streaked with dirt, but she didn't complain. Instead, she focused all her energy on comforting her child. Next to her, the college student, introduced, earlier as Jake, leaned against the wall staring blankly at the ground. His backpack lay open beside him, its contents spilling out. Textbooks, notebooks, and a half-empty water bottle. Jake hadn't said much since climbing into the shelter, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the strap of his bag. He kept glancing toward the hatch as though expecting the worst at any moment. The 2 hitchhikers, brothers named Tom and Ryan, sat close to each other, whispering prayers under their breath. They weren't religious men by nature, but the sheer terror of the situation had driven them to seek comfort in something greater than themselves. Tom clutched a small silver cross around his neck, while Ryan fidgeted nervously with the frayed edge of his jacket sleeve. Their voices were low, barely audible over the deafening roar of the wind outside. And then there was Eleanor Hayes, or Ellie, as she'd introduced herself. She sat apart from the others, leaning against the far corner of the bunker. Her baseball cap was pulled low over her forehead, and her sunglasses were tucked into the pocket of her jacket. Unlike the rest of the group, Ellie seemed unusually composed, almost detached. She held her phone in one hand, scrolling through old messages and emails, though she knew there was no signal down here. Occasionally she glanced up at Marcus, studying him with an unreadable expression. Despite the fear hanging over them, Marcus tried to lighten the mood. He cleared his throat and began speaking in his deep, steady voice. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I've seen some nasty storms in my time, but this one takes the cake." His tone was casual, almost conversational, as if they were sitting in a diner instead of hiding underground from a raging tornado. Jake raised an eyebrow, managing a weak smile. "Really? What's the worst you've ever been through?" Marcus chuckled, leaning casually against the doorframe. "Oh, I remember this one time in Texas. I was hauling livestock, cows mostly, and we got caught in a hailstorm so bad it dented the roof of my trailer. Poor things were mooing like crazy. Thought they were going to break loose and stampede right out of there." A few nervous laughs rippled through the group, easing the tension ever so slightly. Even Ellie cracked a small smile, though she quickly masked it by looking down at her phone again. Encouraged by the reaction, Marcus continued sharing stories from his years on the road. He told them about the quirky roadside diners he'd visited, the truck stop waitresses who became like family, and the countless sunrises he'd watched from the driver's seat of his rig. Each story painted a vivid picture of life as a trucker, a life filled with freedom, adventure, and unexpected moments of beauty. At one point, Liam started whimpering softly, startling Sarah. She rocked him harder, whispering reassurances, but the toddler's cries grew louder. Marcus noticed immediately. Without hesitation, he reached into the side pocket of his backpack and pulled out a pack of gummy bears. It wasn't much, just a small plastic pouch meant for his own kids back home, but it was enough to catch the boy's attention. "Here, buddy," Marcus said, crouching down and offering the candy to Liam. "These are magic gummies. They'll make you brave, just like me." Liam sniffled, reaching out hesitantly to take the treat. When he popped one into his mouth, his tears slowed, replaced by a shy grin. Sarah let out a shaky laugh, brushing strands of hair from her face. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "That was really sweet of you." Marcus waved off her gratitude with a dismissive shrug. "Just part of the service," he joked, earning another round of chuckles from the group. As the minutes dragged on, the storm showed no signs of letting up. The sound of destruction outside was constant, the crash of falling trees, the screech of metal being twisted apart, the dull thud of debris slamming into the ground. Yet inside the shelter, the atmosphere began to shift. The initial panic gave way to a strange sense of camaraderie. These strangers, brought together by circumstance, found solace in each other's company. Ellie, who had remained quiet for most of the ordeal, finally spoke up. "So, Marcus," she began, her tone casual but curious, "how long have you been driving trucks?" Marcus turned to look at her, surprised she'd addressed him directly. "Oh, since I was about 20, he replied. "Started working construction, but I hated being tied down to one place. Trucking lets me see the country, meet new people. Can't imagine doing anything else." Ellie nodded thoughtfully, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer than necessary. "It must take a lot of courage to do what you did today," she said softly. "Not many people would have stopped to help us." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Like I said before, anyone else would have done the same thing. You don't turn your back on folks in trouble." His words resonated deeply with the group. For Ellie, they struck a chord she hadn't expected. As a senator, she was used to navigating a world of politics, where decisions were often driven by strategy and self-interest. Here, in this tiny bunker beneath the earth, Marcus embodied a purity of character she rarely encountered. His actions weren't motivated by recognition or reward. They came from a genuine desire to help others, regardless of who they were or where they came from. The realization left Ellie feeling both humbled and inspired. She resolved then and there to remember this moment, to carry it with her when she returned to Washington. There was something profoundly powerful about witnessing humanity at its best, especially during times of crisis. Eventually, the storm began to subside. The roaring winds softened to a distant rumble, and the violent shaking of the ground eased. Marcus waited several minutes after the noise faded before cautiously opening the hatch. Bright sunlight streamed in, temporarily blinding them. When their eyes adjusted, they stepped out into a scene of utter devastation. Trees lay uprooted, their massive trunks scattered like matchsticks. Power lines dangled uselessly from snapped poles, and entire stretches of road were blocked by debris. The once familiar landscape was unrecognizable, reduced to rubble and ruin. But amidst the chaos, Marcus's truck still stood intact, a testament to its durability and his skillful driving. The group gathered around the vehicle, surveying the damage with a mix of awe and disbelief. "We're lucky to be alive," Jake muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "We wouldn't be if it weren't for you," Sarah added, turning to Marcus with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, not used to being the center of attention. "Don't mention it," he mumbled, scratching the back of his neck. "Just glad y'all made it out okay." Ellie stepped forward, extending her hand. "Marcus, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. If you're ever in D.C., please look me up. I'd love to repay the favor somehow." Confused but polite, Marcus shook her hand. "Sure thing, Ellie. Safe travels." With that, the group began to part ways. Sarah and Liam headed toward a nearby farmhouse that had survived the storm, hoping to find temporary shelter. Jake decided to continue his journey home, determined to reach his family despite the obstacles. Tom and Ryan wandered off, planning to hitch rides wherever they could, and Ellie climbed into her car, watching silently as Marcus returned to his truck and prepared to resume his route. For Marcus, the encounter felt like just another chapter in his life on the road. Little did he know, it was only the beginning of something far greater, a story that would ripple outward, touching lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The group of survivors stood in stunned silence, staring at the devastation around them. The tornado had transformed the peaceful countryside into a scene straight out of a nightmare. Trees that once shaded the roads were now splintered and uprooted, their massive trunks lying like fallen soldiers across fields and highways. Power lines hung limply from snapped poles, their wires trailing dangerously close to puddles of rainwater. Houses that had stood for generations were reduced to jagged piles of wood and metal, their roofs torn away as if by some invisible giant. Even the gas station where they'd first gathered, an unremarkable but functional little outpost, was now a heap of rubble, its sign twisted beyond recognition. Marcus leaned against the side of his battered truck, surveying the wreckage with a mix of relief and sorrow. His rig had survived the storm, though it bore the scars of battle. Dents in the hood, streaks of mud caked along the sides, and a cracked windshield. Still, it was running, which was more than could be said for most vehicles scattered across the landscape. He felt a surge of pride in the old machine. It had carried them safely through chaos, proving itself worthy of the countless miles he'd put into it over the years. As the survivors began assessing their next steps, Marcus turned his attention back to the group. They were shaken but alive, thanks largely to his quick thinking and steady hands. Sarah, the young mother, clutched her toddler tightly, her face pale but resolute. Jake, the college student, wandered aimlessly among the debris, snapping photos on his phone as if trying to process what he'd just endured. Tom and Ryan, the hitchhiking brothers, exchanged quiet words, their earlier fear replaced by a grim determination to keep moving forward. And Ellie, still wearing her baseball cap and sunglasses, stood apart from the others, watching everything with an intensity that seemed out of place for someone who claimed to be just another traveler. Ellie caught Marcus's eye and gave him a small nod as though silently acknowledging his role in saving their lives. She approached him cautiously, her movements deliberate. "Marcus," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Sure," Marcus replied, straightening up. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Do you ever wonder why things happen the way they do? Why certain people end up crossing paths at specific moments?" Marcus chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "To be honest, I don't think about it too much. Life's got a funny way of working itself out, you know? Sometimes good things come from bad situations. Like today, we all ended up here together, and we made it through." Ellie nodded thoughtfully, her expression unreadable. "That's true. But not everyone would have stopped to help us like you did. Most people would have kept driving, hoping someone else would step up. Well, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try," Marcus said simply. "Besides, y'all needed a ride, and my truck's big enough to handle a crowd. Seemed like the right thing to do." His humility struck Ellie deeply. In her world of politics, decisions were often weighed against public opinion, financial gain, or strategic advantage. Rarely did she encounter someone who acted purely out of kindness, without expecting anything in return. Here was Marcus, a man who lived modestly, worked tirelessly, and risked his own safety to save strangers. Yet he brushed off his heroism as nothing special. It was a stark contrast to the self-serving behavior she'd grown accustomed to seeing. In Washington, Jake interrupted their conversation, holding up his phone. "Hey, does anyone have service yet? Mine's still dead." "No luck," Tom chimed in, shaking his head. "We're probably going to have to walk until we find a working tower." "I'll give you a lift," Marcus offered immediately. "I'm heading south anyway. Y'all can ride with me until we hit a town with power." The group exchanged grateful glances. None of them relished the idea of walking through the wreckage, especially with no clear destination in sight. Sarah adjusted Liam on her hip and smiled weakly. "Thank you again, Marcus. We wouldn't have made it this far without you." "It's no trouble," Marcus assured her. "Hop in whenever you're ready." One by one, the survivors climbed back into the truck. This time, the atmosphere inside was different. The initial panic had faded, replaced by a quiet camaraderie born of shared trauma. They talked more freely now, sharing bits and pieces of their lives as they navigated the post-storm landscape. Jake revealed that he was studying engineering and dreamed of designing sustainable buildings that could withstand natural disasters like the one they'd just survived. Tom and Ryan admitted they'd been traveling aimlessly after losing their jobs, unsure of what the future held but determined to stick together. Sarah spoke about her husband, who was serving overseas, and how she hoped he'd be home soon to meet their son. Ellie remained quieter than the rest, offering only vague details about herself. When pressed, she explained that she was returning from a business trip and was eager to get back to her office in D.C. Her answers were polite but guarded, leaving the others curious but unwilling to pry further. As they drove, Marcus pointed out landmarks along the way, or what was left of them. A church steeple lay toppled in a field, its bell silent amidst the ruins. A grain silo leaned precariously, defying gravity despite being battered by winds strong enough to level entire towns. Each site served as a reminder of the storm's fury, yet also of the resilience of the human spirit. People would rebuild. They always did. Hours passed before they reached a small town that had escaped the worst of the tornado's wrath. Its streets were crowded with emergency vehicles, volunteers distributing supplies and residents helping each other clean up. Marcus pulled into a makeshift aid station set up in the parking lot of a local school. "This looks like a good spot to regroup," he announced, turning off the engine. The passengers disembarked slowly, stretching their legs and taking stock of their surroundings. Volunteers rushed over, offering water, blankets, and hot meals. Sarah accepted a bottle of juice for Liam, while Jake gratefully wolfed down a sandwich. Tom and Ryan wandered off to explore the area, promising to return later. Ellie lingered near the truck, watching as Marcus checked the tires and refilled the fuel tank. "You really are incredible, you know that?" Ellie said quietly, approaching him. Marcus looked up, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "I'm just doing what anyone else would have done," he insisted. "No, you're not," Ellie countered firmly. "You went above and beyond. You saved our lives, Marcus. Don't downplay that," he shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise but unable to deny the truth in her words. "Well, I'm glad I could help, that's all that matters." Ellie studied him for a long moment, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't let this moment pass without doing something meaningful. Pulling a crumpled business card from her pocket, she handed it to him. "If you're ever in D.C., please look me up. I mean it. I'd love to thank you properly." Marcus glanced at the card, noting the name printed neatly in bold letters, Eleanor Hayes, U.S. Senator. His eyes widened in shock. "Wait, you're a senator?" Ellie smiled faintly, removing her sunglasses to reveal piercing eyes that radiated both strength and warmth. "Yes, and I'll never forget what you did for us today." For a moment, Marcus was speechless. He'd spent hours driving these strangers to safety, sharing stories and snacks without realizing one of them held such an important position. Yet even now, knowing her true identity, he saw her as the same woman who'd sat quietly in his truck, trusting him to lead them through danger. "Doesn't change anything," Marcus finally said, tucking the card into his pocket. "You're still Ellie to me." Ellie laughed softly, touched by his unaffected response. "That's exactly why I wanted to give you my card. People like you remind me why I chose public service in the first place. Folks helping folks, that's what makes this country great." With that, she extended her hand once more. Marcus shook it firmly, feeling a strange sense of connection to this woman who embodied a world so different from his own. As the group dispersed, each survivor going their separate ways, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this day would stay with him forever. Not because of the destruction, but because of the humanity he'd witnessed in the face of it. Little did he know, Ellie wasn't planning to let their paths diverge so easily. Back in Washington, she already had ideas brewing, ways to honor Marcus's bravery and ensure that acts of kindness like his didn't go unnoticed. For Marcus, however, life returned to normal as he climbed back into his truck and resumed his journey. The road stretched ahead, endless and full of possibilities, just as it always had. Weeks passed after the tornado, and life slowly returned to its usual rhythm for Marcus Johnson. The storm was still fresh in his mind, but he'd already tucked it away as just another remarkable chapter in his decades-long career as a truck driver. He continued hauling freight across the country, navigating highways and back roads with the same ease and confidence that had earned him respect among fellow drivers. To him, the events of that day were significant, yes, but not extraordinary, just part of being human, doing what anyone would do when faced with danger. Back home, however, whispers about the black truck driver who saved strangers during the tornado began to spread. Local news outlets picked up the story after one of the survivors, a college student named Jake, posted about it on social media. His post included photos of Marcus's battered truck surrounded by debris, along with heartfelt captions praising the man who had risked everything to keep them safe. The post went viral almost overnight, sparking comments from people across the country who admired Marcus's courage and selflessness. At first, Marcus didn't notice the attention. He spent most of his days on the road, disconnected from the internet and focused on his deliveries. But soon, the buzz reached him indirectly. Fellow truckers at rest stops started recognizing him, calling out greetings or asking if he was the guy from Oklahoma. Strangers approached him at gas stations, shaking his hand and thanking him for inspiring them with his actions. At first, Marcus brushed it off, attributing the recognition to coincidence or exaggeration. "People are making too much of this," he muttered to himself more than once. "I was just doing my job." But the spotlight only grew brighter. One evening, as Marcus pulled into a diner near Amarillo, Texas, a waitress greeted him warmly and slid a handwritten note across the counter. "Someone left this for you earlier," she said with a smile. Curious, Marcus unfolded the paper and read the message inside. "To the hero on the road, Thank you for reminding us what true kindness looks like. Signed, Ellie. The name sent a jolt through him. It wasn't hard to guess who Ellie was. Memories of the storm flooded back. The frightened faces of the passengers, the cramped quarters of the underground shelter, the quiet dignity of the woman in the baseball cap. Senator Eleanor Hayes. He hadn't heard from her since they parted, ways though he'd occasionally thought about their brief conversation. Now it seemed she hadn't forgotten him either. A few days later, Marcus received an official letter in the mail. It was addressed in elegant script and bore the seal of the United States Senate. Opening it cautiously, he rarely received anything fancier than utility bills. He found an invitation to attend a special ceremony in Washington, D.C. The letter explained that Senator Hayes wanted to honor everyday heroes whose acts of bravery often went unrecognized. Marcus's name was listed prominently among those being celebrated. At first, Marcus laughed it off. Him, in Washington, D.C., surrounded by politicians and reporters? The idea felt absurd. He wasn't the type to seek attention, let alone stand on a stage in front of cameras and crowds. Besides, he had work to do, deadlines to meet, miles to cover. Who was he to take time off for something like this? Yet, despite his initial reluctance, Marcus couldn't ignore the weight of the invitation. It wasn't just about him, it was about the message behind the ceremony. Senator Hayes had emphasized in her letter that recognizing ordinary people doing extraordinary things could inspire others to act with compassion and courage. That resonated with Marcus. If sharing his story could encourage even one person to help someone else in need, wasn't it worth it? After some deliberation and a gentle nudge from his wife, who insisted he deserved the recognition, Marcus agreed to attend. A week later, he found himself standing outside a grand government building in the heart of D.C., dressed in his best suit and tie. The outfit felt unfamiliar compared to his usual jeans and flannel shirts, but he carried himself with the same quiet confidence that defined him on the road. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Politicians mingled with activists, journalists, snapped photos, and attendees exchanged stories of resilience and hope. Marcus spotted Senator Hayes immediately. She stood near the podium, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, her presence commanding yet approachable. When she noticed him enter the room, her face lit up with a warm smile. She excused herself from a group of colleagues and walked over to greet him. "Marcus," she exclaimed, extending her hand. "I'm so glad you came." Marcus shook her hand firmly, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the formality of the setting. "Well, you made it hard to say no," he joked, gesturing toward the elaborate decorations and rows of chairs filling the hall. Ellie chuckled, her tone light but sincere. "You deserve every bit of this, trust me. Tonight is about celebrating people like you, people who remind us what real heroism looks like." Before Marcus could respond, a young woman approached them holding a microphone. "Senator Hayes, may I get a quick word with you before we start?" she asked politely. "Of course," Ellie replied, turning briefly to address the reporter. As she spoke, Marcus took the opportunity to observe the crowd. There were men and women of all ages, backgrounds and professions, firefighters, teachers, volunteers, and even a teenage girl who had organized a community cleanup project after a flood. Each honoree wore a badge bearing their name, and each carried a story of sacrifice and service. When the ceremony began, Marcus listened intently as speakers highlighted the impact of grassroots efforts and individual acts of kindness. Stories of neighbors helping neighbors, strangers risking their lives for others. It was humbling to hear how many unsung heroes existed in the world. Finally, it was Senator Hayes' turn to take the stage. She stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone before addressing the audience. Her voice rang clear and strong, filled with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we gather to celebrate individuals whose actions embody the very best of humanity. These are not celebrities or public figures. They are ordinary people who chose to step up when it mattered most. People like Marcus Johnson." As the spotlight shifted to him, Marcus felt a wave of nerves wash over him. Applause erupted around the room and he rose reluctantly from his seat, unsure of what to do next. Ellie motioned for him to join her on stage, her smile encouraging. Reluctantly, he made his way up the steps, feeling every pair of eyes in the room fixed on him. Marcus doesn't consider himself a hero, Ellie continued, her gaze steady as she addressed the crowd. He'll tell you he was simply doing what anyone else would have done. But that's precisely why he's here tonight, to remind us that heroism isn't defined by titles or wealth. It's about showing up for others when they need you most. Whether it's stopping to help strangers during a tornado or lending a hand to a neighbor in need, these small acts of kindness ripple outward, creating waves of change. The audience erupted into applause again, and Marcus found himself smiling despite his discomfort. For the first time, he allowed himself to see his actions through someone else's eyes, not as routine or expected, but as extraordinary. When Ellie handed him a plaque commemorating his bravery, he accepted it with gratitude, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying over the cheers. "This means a lot. But honestly, I didn't do anything special. I just followed my heart, and sometimes that's enough." His words struck a chord with everyone in the room. Journalists scribbled notes furiously, capturing the essence of his humility. Attendees wiped away tears, moved by the sincerity of his message. Even Ellie seemed momentarily choked up, her eyes glistening as she nodded in agreement. After the ceremony, guests lingered to congratulate the honorees. Marcus was bombarded with handshakes, hugs, and questions from reporters eager to learn more about his story. Though he remained modest, deflecting praise whenever possible, he couldn't deny the warmth he felt from connecting with others. People shared their own experiences of hardship and survival, thanking him for inspiring them to pay it forward. Ellie stayed close throughout the evening, introducing Marcus to colleagues and ensuring he felt comfortable in the unfamiliar environment. At one point, she pulled him aside for a private moment. "You've touched so many lives already," she said softly, "including mine. Thank you for reminding me why I fight for policies that support communities like yours." Marcus nodded, feeling a swell of pride mixed with humility. "If anything comes from this, I hope it encourages folks to look out for each other. We're stronger together." By the end of the night, Marcus realized something important. Recognition wasn't about personal glory. It was about amplifying the values he held dear: kindness, courage, and unity. And as he boarded his truck the next morning, ready to hit the road again, he carried those lessons with him, knowing they would guide him wherever his journey led. The weeks following the recognition ceremony in Washington, D.C. were a whirlwind for Marcus Johnson. For a man who preferred solitude on the open road and quiet evenings at home with his family, the sudden attention felt overwhelming at times. Yet, as much as he tried to downplay his role in saving the group during the tornado, the impact of his actions rippled far beyond what he could have imagined. His story became a beacon of hope, inspiring countless others to reflect on their own capacity for kindness and courage. Senator Eleanor Hayes wasted no time in turning her gratitude into action. Back in her office on Capitol Hill, she began drafting legislation aimed at improving disaster preparedness in rural areas, communities often overlooked when resources were allocated. She titled the bill the Community Resilience Act, emphasizing the importance of empowering local heroes like Marcus to lead efforts in times of crisis. The proposal included funding for storm shelters, emergency training programs, and mobile communication systems that could function even when traditional networks failed. Ellie knew firsthand how critical these measures were. Her experience during the tornado had opened her eyes to the vulnerabilities faced by small towns across America. While larger cities had access to advanced warning systems and well-equipped emergency services, rural communities often relied solely on the resourcefulness of their residents. Marcus's quick thinking and willingness to act had undoubtedly saved lives that day, but she couldn't help but wonder how many others might not be so fortunate without proper support. To build momentum for the bill, Ellie arranged a series of press conferences and town hall meetings, inviting Marcus to join her whenever his schedule allowed. At first, Marcus hesitated. He wasn't comfortable speaking publicly or being thrust into the political spotlight. But Ellie reassured him, explaining that his presence would humanize the issue and make it relatable to everyday Americans. People need to see someone like you. A working man who stepped up when it mattered, she told him. Your voice will carry more weight than any statistic I can cite. With some coaxing, and a promise from Ellie that she'd handle most of the talking, Marcus agreed to participate. His first appearance was at a community forum in Oklahoma, not far from where the tornado had struck. The event drew a large crowd, including survivors of the storm, local officials, and reporters eager to hear Marcus's perspective. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus stood awkwardly behind the podium, gripping its edges tightly. He cleared his throat and began in his deep, steady voice. I'm not used to standing up here, he admitted, earning a few chuckles from the audience. I'm just a truck driver. My job is to deliver goods safely and get back on the road. But sometimes life throws you into situations you didn't plan for. That day, all I did was trust my instincts and try to help the people around me. It wasn't about being brave. It was about doing what needed to be done. His words resonated deeply with those in attendance. Many nodded in agreement, while others wiped away tears. A young woman raised her hand during the Q&A session, asking how ordinary citizens could prepare themselves to respond in similar emergencies. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. Be aware of your surroundings, he said. Know where safe places are, whether it's a storm shelter or just a sturdy building, and don't underestimate the power of teamwork. When everyone works together, amazing things can happen. Ellie watched proudly as Marcus fielded questions with grace and authenticity. She realized then that his strength lay not in grand gestures or polished speeches, but in his ability to connect with people on a fundamental level. He spoke plainly, without pretense, and his sincerity inspired trust. By the end of the forum, several attendees approached him personally to thank him for sharing his story. One elderly man clasped Marcus's hand firmly, saying, You remind us that we're all capable of making a difference. As the weeks went on, Marcus traveled to other events alongside Ellie, visiting states hit hard by natural disasters. In Texas, they met with families still rebuilding after hurricanes. In California, they toured wildfire-ravaged neighborhoods and heard harrowing tales of survival. Each stop reinforced the urgency of the Community Resilience Act and highlighted the resilience of the human spirit. Through it all, Marcus remained humble, deflecting praise and focusing instead on the needs of the communities they visited. Back in Washington, Ellie worked tirelessly to rally support for the bill. She reached across party lines, collaborating with colleagues who shared her vision of a safer, more prepared nation. Her advocacy was bolstered by the growing public interest in Marcus's story. Social media campaigns using hashtags like #EverydayHeroes and Resilient Together gained traction, drawing attention to the importance of grassroots efforts in disaster response. Schools began incorporating lessons about community service and emergency preparedness into their curriculums, inspired by Marcus's example. Despite the mounting pressure, Ellie made sure to stay connected with Marcus, checking in regularly to ensure he wasn't feeling overwhelmed. Their friendship deepened over time, rooted in mutual respect and admiration. Ellie admired Marcus's unwavering humility and commitment to helping others, while Marcus appreciated Ellie's determination to create meaningful change. Though their worlds couldn't have been more different, one navigating the complexities of politics, the other traversing the highways of America, they found common ground in their shared belief in the power of humanity. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Ellie invited Marcus to join her for dinner at a quiet restaurant near the Capitol. Over plates of Southern comfort food, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and collard greens, they talked openly about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Ellie confessed that Marcus's actions during the tornado had reignited her passion for public service. Sometimes it's easy to lose sight of why I do this job, she admitted. But seeing how you put yourself on the line for strangers reminded me that leadership isn't about titles or power. It's about serving others. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, savoring a bite of chicken. I think we're all leaders in our own way, he replied. Whether it's driving a truck, raising kids, or passing laws, we all have roles to play. Doesn't matter how big or small. It's about making a positive impact. Ellie smiled, touched by his wisdom. You should run for office someday, she teased lightly. Marcus laughed heartily, shaking his head. Oh no, Senator. Politics isn't for me. I'll leave that to the experts like you. Though he meant it as a joke, Ellie couldn't help but consider the possibility. Marcus had a natural charisma and an innate ability to inspire trust, qualities that made him a natural leader. Still, she respected his decision to remain grounded in the life he loved. There was something profoundly admirable about a man content with his place in the world, uninterested in fame or fortune. By the time the Community Resilience Act reached the Senate floor for a vote, it had garnered widespread bipartisan support. Lawmakers cited Marcus's story as a testament to the importance of fostering community-driven solutions to natural disasters. When the bill passed unanimously, Ellie took a moment to call Marcus personally. "We did it," she said, her voice brimming with excitement. "Because of you, thousands of lives will be better protected in the future." Marcus was speechless, overcome with emotion. "I didn't do anything special," he finally managed. "This is all because of you and the work you've done." "That may be true," Ellie replied warmly. "But none of this would have happened if it weren't for your example. You showed us what's possible when we care for one another." In the months that followed, Marcus returned to his routine, delivering freight across the country and cherishing the simple joys of life on the road. But he carried the lessons of his journey with him, reminding himself daily of the ripple effects of kindness. Strangers continued to recognize him at truck stops and diners, thanking him for inspiring them to act with compassion. Children sent letters addressed to the hero truck driver, enclosing drawings of storms and trucks and smiling faces. For Ellie, Marcus's story became a cornerstone of her legacy as a senator. She often referenced his actions in speeches, urging her peers to prioritize policies that empowered everyday citizens to step up in times of need. Together they proved that even in moments of chaos, connections forged between strangers could lead to lasting change. And though their paths rarely crossed after the whirlwind of publicity subsided, Marcus and Ellie stayed in touch, exchanging occasional calls and texts. Their bond transcended titles and professions, built on a foundation of shared values and mutual respect. They were proof that even the most unlikely friendships could leave an indelible mark on the world. Months turned into years, and life for Marcus Johnson settled back into its familiar rhythm. The road remained his constant companion, stretching endlessly before him as he hauled freight from one corner of the country to another. Yet despite returning to the simplicity of his daily routine, Marcus couldn't deny that something fundamental had shifted within him. The tornado, the strangers he'd saved, and the unexpected friendship with Senator Eleanor Hayes had left an indelible mark on his heart. He carried those memories like treasures, tucked away in the quiet corners of his mind, surfacing whenever he needed a reminder of the good people could do for one another. The Community Resilience Act became a cornerstone of disaster preparedness across America, transforming how rural communities responded to emergencies. Shelters were built in areas previously deemed too remote or underfunded. Training programs taught residents how to identify safe spaces, administer first aid, and communicate effectively during crises. Mobile alert systems now reached even the most isolated regions, ensuring no one was left behind when storms rolled in. These changes didn't happen overnight, but their impact was undeniable. Towns once vulnerable to nature's fury grew stronger, united by a shared sense of purpose and readiness. For Marcus, the legacy of the bill extended far beyond its practical benefits. It symbolized hope, a belief that ordinary individuals could spark extraordinary change. Whenever he passed through towns where new shelters stood proudly beside schools or community centers, he felt a quiet pride. Though he never sought recognition, knowing his actions had inspired such widespread progress filled him with gratitude. People often stopped him at truck stops to thank him, not just for saving lives during the tornado, but for reminding them of the power of kindness and selflessness. Ellie, too, continued her work in Washington, championing causes that prioritized the needs of underserved communities. Her collaboration with Marcus had reignited her passion for public service, grounding her in the belief that true leadership came from listening to and learning from those on the front lines. She often reflected on their friendship, marveling at how fate had brought them together. In Marcus, she saw a reflection of the values she strived to uphold: humility, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to helping others. Their bond remained strong, even as their lives took different paths. Every so often, Ellie would invite Marcus to D.C. for special events or legislative updates. At first, Marcus hesitated, reluctant to step back into the limelight. But over time, he grew more comfortable attending these gatherings, finding joy in reconnecting with Ellie and meeting others who shared his desire to make a difference. During one visit, Ellie surprised him with a private tour of the Capitol building. As they walked beneath the soaring ceilings adorned with intricate murals, Ellie pointed out portraits of historical figures known for their courage and compassion. "You know," she said, pausing beside a painting of Harriet Tubman, "you belong among these stories. Not because you're perfect, but because you remind us that heroism isn't reserved for the famous or powerful. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." Marcus chuckled softly, scratching the back of his neck. "I don't know about all that," he replied. "But if sharing my story helps someone else feel brave enough to help a neighbor or lend a hand, then I guess it's worth it." Ellie smiled, her eyes shining with admiration. "That's exactly why you're here, Marcus. You've shown us that heroism starts small, with a single act of kindness, and sometimes that's all it takes to change the world." Back home, Marcus's family noticed subtle changes in him. His wife, Cheryl, remarked on how much more patient and reflective he seemed since the tornado. Their 2 teenage sons, who had always admired their father's strength and work ethic, now looked up to him for entirely new reasons. When friends or neighbors asked Marcus about his experiences, he spoke openly, encouraging them to find ways to contribute to their own communities, whether it was volunteering at food banks, mentoring young drivers, or simply checking in on elderly neighbors. Marcus emphasized that every effort mattered. One summer evening, Marcus returned home after completing a long haul. The sun dipped, low on the horizon, casting golden hues across the fields surrounding his modest farmhouse. Cheryl greeted him at the door with a warm hug, and their boys eagerly showed him a project they'd been working on, a miniature storm shelter they'd built in the backyard using scrap materials. They explained that they wanted to practice building something sturdy and safe, inspired by the stories their dad had told them about the underground bunker that had saved lives during the tornado. Marcus knelt beside them, inspecting their handiwork with genuine pride. "This is impressive," he said, ruffling his younger son's hair. "You're thinking ahead just like I taught you. Always be ready for whatever comes your way." Later that night, as the family sat around the dinner table, Marcus shared a story he hadn't told before. It was about a man he'd met during one of his trips to D.C., a veteran who had lost everything in a flood, but still found the strength to help rebuild his neighborhood. The man's resilience reminded Marcus of the hitchhiking brothers, Tom and Ryan, and the college student Jake, and even Sarah and her toddler Liam. Each survivor had faced unimaginable hardship, yet emerged stronger because of the bonds they formed in the face of adversity. "Life throws curveballs," Marcus said, his voice steady and warm. "Sometimes you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to give up, or you can choose to stand tall and help the people around you. That's what being a hero really means. It's not about wearing a cape or saving the world. It's about showing up when it counts." His words lingered in the air, resonating deeply with his family. Cheryl reached across the table to squeeze his hand, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You've always been a hero to us, Marcus," she said softly, "even if you don't see it yourself." Years later, when Marcus finally retired from trucking, he decided to dedicate his time to mentoring young drivers and advocating for safer highways. He traveled to schools and community centers, sharing his experiences and urging others to prioritize empathy and responsibility in their careers. His talks weren't flashy or polished. They were honest and heartfelt, drawing listeners in with their authenticity. Many credited Marcus with inspiring them to pursue careers in transportation, emergency services, or public policy. Ellie kept close tabs on Marcus's post-retirement endeavors, cheering him on from afar. Though their visits became less frequent, their connection remained as strong as ever. On Marcus's 60th birthday, Ellie sent him a heartfelt letter, thanking him once again for changing her perspective on leadership and humanity. Enclosed with the letter was a framed photograph of the two of them standing side by side on the steps of the Capitol building, smiling broadly as cameras flashed around them. "You've given me so much more than I could ever repay," Ellie wrote. "Your courage, humility, and generosity have shaped not only my career but also my understanding of what it means to truly serve others. Thank you for being exactly who you are, for showing me, and the rest of the world, that heroes come in all forms." Tears welled in Marcus's eyes as he read the letter. For a moment he allowed himself to bask in the knowledge that his actions, simple though they may have seemed, had touched countless lives. He thought back to the day of the tornado, when he'd made the split-second decision to stop and help a group of frightened strangers. At the time he hadn't considered the ripple effects of that choice. All he'd known was that it was the right thing to do. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. That kindness, no matter how small, had the power to create waves of change. Marcus smiled to himself, tucking the letter and photo into a drawer alongside other mementos from his journey. Then, grabbing his keys and heading outside, he climbed into his old truck, one last ride along the open road, where the horizon stretched endlessly before him, full of possibility and promise.